Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Madam President, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It is my honor to welcome you at the 29th Annual Forum 2000 Conference. It is great to see you all. For several years, the free world has been facing constant pressure caused by the convergence of a series of crises which are gradually escalating. The rules-based international order is struggling. We face uncertainty and tension in transatlantic relations and mounting geopolitical and technological challenges. We see ongoing conflicts, some of them virtually forgotten by the world, such as the ones in Sudan or Myanmar. We also live in an internally weakened and unsure democratic community, and it seems that everywhere we look, authoritarians advance and Democrats are on the defensive. Looking at these different crises, we can find some common threads and common roots. What, or perhaps who, for example, are the principal threats to the peaceful, rules-based future? It is no coincidence that today's conference program starts with Russia's disruptive and aggressive behavior and ends with a session pondering the ultimate ambitions and objectives of the ever more powerful People's Republic of China. These two regimes are actively undermining the existing rules, establishing new authoritarian alliances, and promoting their own vision of the world. The vision where the powerful dictate and the weaker and smaller obey. One of them has openly violated international law and brutally attacked its peaceful neighbor. The other may be preparing to do the same. Astonishingly, their leaders are not global pariahs. On the other hand, they participate in or even hold pompous summits, lead friendly discussions with other international leaders, and they, paradoxically, talk about peace. In a connected crisis, the global democratic community itself is tackling its internal problems. The traditional West faces uncertainty and tension in transatlantic relations. We witness within democratic societies a gradually growing polarization, radicalization, a turn towards populism, and the fragility of democratic institutions. To be fair, we cannot blame Beijing or Moscow for the imperfect state of our societies, which is mostly of our own making. We, however, cannot overlook how eagerly these two, and as well as some other authoritarian regimes, use and exploit our imperfections to pursue their interests and undermine our sovereignty. Artificial intelligence and other technological advancements are another development that we sometimes struggle to cope with, and that is in certain ways connected to the growing threat of authoritarianism. Technological progress represents a major opportunity and offers innumerable benefits to the humankind. But it also offers the authoritarian regimes new dangerous tools and enhances their capacity for ever more pervasive Orwellian control inside our countries. It also enables dictatorships, as we have seen in some recent elections, to reach into the information space and political system of democracies. So we see a series of crises and challenges that are connected and that reinforce each other. But as President Pavel, the founder of Forum 2000 Foundation, regularly emphasized, there is always hope. And hope doesn't emerge from nowhere. We need to actively contribute to it. In the 20th century, we have seen two most horrible totalitarian regimes in history defeated by a concerted effort of democracies. We have seen numerous cases of crises of democratic governance, and we have also witnessed how democracies were able to learn from these crises and renew themselves and emerge stronger. Recently, we have seen a case of democratic resilience in Moldova, whose president Maia Sandu, a frequent Forum 2000 participant, stands firmly against Moscow's pressure. And on Friday, the wonderful news arrived that Maria Corina Machado, the most courageous and consistent fighter for the return of democracy in Venezuela, from whom we will hear at the closing panel tomorrow, has received the Nobel Peace Prize. I cannot imagine anyone who would deserve it more. So, hope is based on experience, historical facts, and on our own effort. It sometimes comes unexpected, and we should never give it up. The Forum 2000, since its inception, is and will remain a place for and of hope. At this moment of uncertainty and global polarization, it is therefore with hope that the international democratic community needs to look for ways to address these multiple crises, aiming to act collaboratively, emphasizing multilateralism and mutual respect, and striving for balanced and strategic engagement among all global democratic partners. Democracies and democrats need to bridge the gaps that sometimes divide us and work together for the greater good of protecting the democratic values and the international rules-based order. That is why we at the Forum 2000 Foundation have over the past years strategically enhanced our cooperation with global partners, and that is why we are now focusing more and more at fostering the vital transatlantic bond. The aim is, through the Forum 2000 conference and our other projects, to offer an ever-growing platform for representatives of civil society, activists, governments, and parliamentary officials, as well as experts from academia and research institutions, not only to discuss the common challenges, but to seek solutions and establish cooperation and new partnerships that contribute to achieving real and positive change. To structure our discussions, we have divided this conference into 5 broad thematic areas: reinforcing democratic ties in a fractured world, responding to the 21st century authoritarianism, democracy and technology, forum for Ukraine, and thematic and regional focus. Now, in this complicated environment and facing numerous tests, democracy around the world is being forced to prove its resilience and vitality. To understand how easy it is to lose democracy and how difficult, sometimes bloody, it may be to regain it, there are, unfortunately, a number of places we can look at in the world. One such place is Myanmar, where a military junta overthrew the legitimately elected representatives of the country in the February 2021 coup. The leader of Democratic Myanmar, member of the Forum 2000 International Advisory Board, Madame Aung San Suu Kyi, remains in prison ever since. Let us now please listen to her son.
Distinguished participants of the Forum 2000 conference, thank you for the honor of addressing you today. My mother, Aung San Suu Kyi, was a friend of President Václav Havel, the founder of Forum 2000, and she currently serves as a member of the Forum 2000 International Advisory Board. In light of this profound connection, I call on all participants of this conference to support our efforts to secure her immediate release and facilitate the restoration of democracy in Burma. The people of Burma have achieved so much in their struggle against the brutal military junta, but they still need the help of the international community. They need our help. As democrats around the world, it is our collective responsibility to support them, to ensure my mother and thousands of other political prisoners are released, and to see all of their fundamental human rights restored. If we do not stand up for those in need now, how can we ever expect anyone to stand up for us when it is our turn to feel the boots of tyranny on our necks? Thank you for hearing this urgent appeal. May we all uphold our collective responsibility to the cause of democracy and freedom in Burma. Thank you.
To protect and defend democracy, it is not enough to only take care of our own space, our community, our town, our country. It is also important to take care of our friends and allies everywhere, to show solidarity, to effectively support each other wherever we are. Václav Havel and his Charter 77 colleagues in the 1970s and 1980s communist Czechoslovakia benefited from such solidarity. Now it is time that we pay back. Therefore, please heed the plea of Kim Aris that we just heard and sign the call to release his mother, Aung San Suu Kyi. You may do so by using the QR code behind me, by signing a physical copy at our information stand in front of this room, which is in the foyer, or simply by addressing one of my colleagues in the Forum 2000 team, and they will guide you. I would like to thank all our partners without whom this gathering would not be possible, in particular the National Endowment for Democracy, the International Visegrad Fund, the Robert Bosch Foundation, and the numerous partners and program partners that have made this conference thematically rich and hopefully interesting. On behalf of all of those who have worked hard to make our gathering possible, allow me to welcome you again at the 2025 Forum 2000 conference. We look forward to inspiring and productive discussions. And now, to deliver the keynote address, it is my honor to welcome His Excellency President Petr Pavel.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of democracy, it is a pleasure to be in your distinguished company once again, among the leaders, defenders of human rights, independent journalists, and young people who care about our shared future. People who stand up for the powerless and strive to make the world more hopeful. Our segment of the conference is devoted to the future of relations with Russia. We meet in the fourth year of its unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. Russia is ever more emboldened by the support of its autocratic enablers, and yet increasingly burdened by the domestic costs of its senseless and bloody campaign. Today, Russia represents a fundamental threat to Europe's security, freedom, and democracy. It seeks to dismantle the democratic system and dominate Eastern and Central Europe piece by piece. To achieve this, it aims to weaken and divide the transatlantic community. President Trump's efforts towards peace in Ukraine offered Russia an opportunity to show how serious it really was about a negotiated solution. In our part of the world, the answer surprised no one. Russia was never ready to negotiate in good faith. Instead, it has doubled its cynical military campaign, using terror as a weapon to break Ukraine's morale. The recent violations of Polish and Estonian airspace by Russian drones and fighter jets confirms that Moscow's readiness to take risks and to escalate further is only growing. This war has many battlegrounds, from cyber attacks to intimidation of those who speak against Putin. Above all, it is a war for hearts and minds. A war fought not only with weapons on the front lines, but through deception within our societies. Deception that preys on fear, frustration, and even legitimate grievances. Russia has been sowing distrust within our societies, distorting the truth about its war in Ukraine, spreading lies about Europe, our allies, and our own institutions. This is a script already familiar across much of Europe. In Georgia, I am sorry to say, Russia has not been unsuccessful. In Moldova, so far it has failed. But the struggle goes on. In my own country, a recent study found that pro-Russian disinformation websites now produce more content than established media. Their messages have taken roots in parts of our society. It is our task to do much more in our own interest. Disinformation will not disappear on its own. It creates a parallel reality, a kind of a rabbit hole. It is easy to fall into, but much harder to climb out of it. That is why, regardless the composition of the next Czech government, it is essential to uphold and strengthen the very foundations of democratic civic structures. People deserve reliable information and authentic voices. That is why we need strong public service media and a healthy media landscape, offering plural perspectives without spreading hatred and deepening uncertainties. In this regard, I welcome the establishment of the Regional Office of Reporters Without Borders. It will strengthen the defense of independent journalism, support journalists under threat, and help build resilience against disinformation across Central and Eastern Europe. But free media is not enough. We also need independent universities, rigorous science, an impartial judiciary, and a vibrant civic structure of principled, non-governmental organizations. They give courage a voice and remind authorities that power must serve the public good. This ecosystem is our best protection against internal division and hybrid threats. Our country has found itself on the brink of disaster more than once. We know that we can never take our statehood and freedom for granted. In September 1938, as Czechoslovakia faced a shameless smear campaign, the Czech writer and humanist Karel Čapek raised his voice in his newspaper article, Prayer for Truth. He warned that when lies become the language of politics, they poison nations and dig abysses between them that not even decades can fill. Čapek saw clearly that falsehood prepares and sustains violence, and that to rid the world of lies is more than disarmament. In the 1930s, we woke up too late. We must not make the same mistake again. This is not a confrontation we have chosen. For 2 decades, Russia has defied Europe's efforts to ease tensions. Unable to deliver at home, it invents enemies abroad and wraps itself in the flag. Europe remains open to negotiations in good faith. But any dialogue on Ukraine and on the security arrangements between Russia and its European neighbors is only possible where there is a basic respect for rules and at least a baseline of trust. So far, we have only seen Europe's interests ignored and old imperial ambitions revived. But there can be no way forward without a commitment to truth. That is true at home, and that is true in our relations with Russia. While Russian ruling elites, or so-called Verkhovka, has made genuine dialogue impossible, we should seek to engage with those who keep an open mind, with those who can look at their own country without yielding to the world of lies. The people whom Forum 2000 brings to the fore are particularly well suited to this task. Ladies and gentlemen, our approach must serve 3 purposes. First, to listen and understand, through direct experience, but also through sustained diplomatic presence at ambassadorial level. Second, to contest Kremlin narratives. And third, to stand with those inside Russia who risk everything for truth. In darker times, foreign solidarity kept our own dissidents going. We should not offer less. Let us not allow lies to drive out truth. As Karel Čapek warned, they indeed poison nations and dig abysses between them. Against these efforts, we must stand together. The Russian democratic movement is part of the answer to what future relations with Russia may one day look like. The task ahead is immense. But the first step is clear. If there is to be a decent future for us and for Russia, for all who believe that humanity can learn from history, Ukraine must prevail in safeguarding its sovereignty. Supporting Ukraine's defense against the barbarity of Putin's war is more than an act of solidarity. It is the surest way to bring closer day when truth, not lies, will have the final word. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. President, for those powerful remarks. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce our other keynote speaker of this morning. She represents a country that is currently undergoing a difficult period, with its democracy being seriously undermined and its geopolitical orientation, despite the strong European preference of its citizens, being brutally turned from Brussels to Moscow. We've heard about it yesterday in the evening, and we'll hear about it more during this conference. It is my enormous honor to welcome Her Excellency Salome Zourabichvili, President of Georgia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start my opening remarks by thanking Forum 2000 for the award that was given yesterday to Mzia Marlobeli, representing freedom of Georgian journalism, representing the fight of individuals against what is now authoritarianism in progress, representing the resilience of Georgians to Russian influence and the resilience also of Georgian women. So I want to thank you for that and hope that this award will be one of the symbols of a renewed and intensified attention of our partners to what is happening in Georgia. Thank you. Because the future of the relations with Russia, the relations of Europe as a whole with Russia, is largely determined today by what will happen in Ukraine, and we all know that, but also to a different extent by what will happen in Georgia. For decades, we have been, I would say unfortunately, neighbor to Russia. God made the Caucasus Mountains as a barrier, but that was not enough. And along these last 3.5 centuries, Russia has acted not as a partner, not as a neighbor, but as an invader, as an aggressor, as an occupant, and as a destabilizing force. Then that was a pattern that started a long time ago. In 1783, Georgian King Heracles II signed a treaty of peace with Russia to be protected from other imperial neighbors. And it ended this act of confidence into this Orthodox neighbor, ended with the abolition of Georgian kingdom, the abolition of Georgian church, the occupation of the territory that became a governorate. In 1920, the first Georgian Republic signed a treaty of friendship with Russia on May 7th, 1920, And in February 1921, the Russian army entered Georgia, aggressed Georgia on 3 fronts, and that was the end of the first independent republic. In 1992, Georgia and Russia signed the Dagomish Agreement on the situation in Ossetia, in which Russia recognized the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Georgia, and that remained as a de facto occupied territory until the 2008 war, which transformed this occupation by Russian peacekeeping forces into proper occupation. And that was a short time after I had signed with Minister Lavrov a treaty on the withdrawal of the Russian military bases. That was in 2005 and 2008. So we have a bad experience with different Russias, whatever their status, Soviet, imperial, modern Russia, also imperial. It always ends in the same way. And today, again, Georgia is a testing ground, and of course with less attention, because the real testing ground is again in Ukraine, where we are all concerned by this massive aggression, and when we all know, and that the European partners have finally realized that it depends on them to stop Russia there militarily and to develop their own capacities. But the other testing ground, less visible maybe, is in Georgia. That's where Russia started this new hybrid war that has started approximately at the same time than the military war against Ukraine. That's when Russia, maybe seeing the progress, thanks to Ukraine, of the path towards Europe, the acceleration of this Euro integration path, started a new hybrid war that was resting on new legislation, on using a government that until then had been pro-European, elected because it was pro-European, elected because it introduced in the Georgian constitution an article that obliges all institutions to support and facilitate Euro-Atlantic integration. And that same government became a proxy government for Russian interests and Russian objectives, introducing one after one all the laws that we call Russian laws, all the laws that were used in Russia to suppress civil society, to suppress non-governmental organization, to suppress media freedom, to suppress courts' independence. We don't have any independent courts anymore, so you can imagine in what conditions we had the last elections. Unfortunately, after the last parliamentary elections in 2024, there were still people in Europe, partners, that were asking me, because I declared that these elections were the result of a massive Russian operation, they were asking me, what proofs do you have? Well, I think that today, after a few more examples of that, and especially Moldova, nobody is asking what proofs we have of Russian operations, of Russian disinformation, of Russian manipulation of different data, and when it's exerted against a small country, and that's why I'm saying we are a test, that Russia knows very well for all these past centuries, knows the character, knows what are the elements that you can use, the psychological warfare that is used. It's very understandable that it's a very good testing ground for Russia, and I'm always saying, well, if Russian propaganda and different indirect subversive methods can work in Georgia, which has, until today, 2 occupied territories, 20% directly occupied by Russia, where Russia has installed military bases, those that it withdrew after the agreement we had from the Georgian territory proper, as they say, that's not surprising that it can have success in other countries of Europe that were less prepared, know less what were the Soviet methods of propaganda and then the Russian methods of propaganda. So that Russian playbook is really used plainly, completely. We have seen a few days ago a modeled form of the attack against the Winter Palace, which was absurd. The fences were prepared for this attack beforehand by probably the local forces. Some scenario was prepared with probably using some parts of the opposition that were not that prepared or that conscious of what was happening. But they played this model scenario for only one reason. And the reason was to discredit the resistance movement that exists in Georgia, the peaceful resistance movement that is on the streets now for 319 days, that has not stopped since the declaration by the Prime Minister last November that he was suspending, stopping, we don't know anymore, the relations and the negotiations with the European Union, and de facto was the recognition of the 180 degrees turn towards Russia. And since then, this peaceful movement has been on the street without a car burned, without a shop window being destroyed. And that is a movement which the regime was unable to stop. They cannot stop the Mzia Marlobelis and the others. And there are 50 conscience prisoners that are in jail, plus those that have been arrested these last days, and we are now in the numbers of hundreds. And you cannot stop that. So in order not to stop it, but to discredit it, they engineered this type of attack on the Winter Palace, which was a presidential palace. But that won't work either, because since then the peaceful movement continues. It's a movement that is there to defend the Constitution and not to attack the Constitution. It's a movement that's there to stabilize the country in its European path and not to destabilize it, because everyone in this movement knows that any form of destabilization only plays in the hands of our neighbor that is so close, because the Russian bases in Trin Valley region are 40 kilometers from the capital, Tbilisi. So nobody in his right mind wants any form of destabilization, and that's why this movement has been so adamantly peaceful and will remain peaceful. And I am the representative of this movement here and elsewhere. I'm trying to represent the Georgian population as a whole, because as a whole, the Georgian population, for now 30 years, has been saying that it wants democracy, it wants Europe, it wants Euro-Atlantic integration. All the opinion polls, all the elections have been about that and have been the same answer. So now there are other ways of presenting this public opinion, and clearly there are other forms of pressure, and that's also the testing ground of Russians' capabilities. There are other forms in which you can coerce or attract or subvert parts of the opinion public and of the population. But that doesn't mean that Georgia, as Georgia, has changed his vision of its future, which it cannot be elsewhere but in Europe. It can never be relying on our northern neighbor because of exactly our history, our relations, and everything we know about them. We also know the new Russia and the new Russians. We have 100,000 of them that have come to Georgia after the war in Ukraine and are still living in Georgia very comfortably so, because Georgians are basically very tolerant. But I've never heard, except in one case over now, 3 years, except one case, I've never heard any form of empathy by these Russians that are living on our soil and very peacefully, that they share our feelings about our occupied territories, that they share our concern about Ukraine, nothing of that kind. They're just living there. So my hopes in a new Russia are very slim if we're talking about what can be the future. So first, I think that we should have no illusions. Normal relations are not possible under the current Russian regime, and dialogue without accountability is not diplomacy, it's surrender. Second, there can be no distance. Russia is not a distant problem for any one of you. For Georgia, Ukraine, and some countries that have common borders with Russia, it's a daily reality that we all know very well. But it's not only them, and this new hybrid strategy that is tested in Georgia is one that can apply anywhere. It doesn't need common borders. So those that are not concerned directly, that are a bit more far away, that are not concerned or think they are not concerned directly by the war in Ukraine, better figure out that they are concerned by this hybrid indirect war that has started already in Georgia. Third, there has to be no ambiguity. It is not only a military conflict that we have with Russia, it's a clash of systems. Russia promotes authoritarianism and corruption as instruments, but it's basically an imperialist state, and it remains an imperialist state, and it will remain so as long as it will have some occupied territories somewhere, whether it's in Japan or whether it's on the western part of Russia. Because Russia, as an imperial power, does not know where are its borders. You ask any Russian to draw a map of Russia, and you will get many different maps, which is not the case of any of you. You all know how to draw a map of your country. Well, that's the problem. Fourth, there can be no vetoes on sovereignty. Peace will only come when Russia can no longer dictate the choices of its neighbors. NATO's door must remain open. EU enlargement must continue because that's part of EU tomorrow's power, and we need, all of us, and the world needs, a powerful, democratic European Union, and it has to support it across the regions and further. And crucially, we must treat Russia's non-military hybrid aggression, disinformation, election meddling, cyber attacks, propaganda, with the same seriousness as military invasion. Georgia's experience is a red flag for democracies. Ignore it, and the cost will spread. So we need the partners, the Western partners, the United States and the European partners, to think about what have to be the preventive measures against this new hybrid policy. It cannot be the case that suddenly Russia become more effective in soft power than soft being the word for it, but not very soft, cannot be the one that masters these new instruments of soft power, while the European Union, because it starts to worry and to master the military power, forgets about soft power, which has been all these years the one measurement of the European success around this large region. Of course, and I want to reaffirm that very firmly here, the outcome of the war in Ukraine will shape not only Russia's future behavior, but the security of the entire world. And Russia is not winning that war. That is something that we have to realize. 3.5 years after its start, after the 3 days through which it was going to take over Kiev and the whole country, Russia is not winning the war. But Russia has to be pushed back to its own borders, militarily, politically, and economically, until it finally faces the cost and the consequences of the aggression. That is why supporting Ukraine is not only a moral duty, but a strategic necessity for everyone. Russia's brutal campaign is part of a larger pattern. Beyond the battlefield, Moscow spreads disinformation, deploys mercenaries, and destabilizes regions far away from Europe, from Africa to Latin America. At home, it silences dissent and crushes civil society. So we do not choose our neighbors, but we do choose our values, our alliances, and our future. Georgia has chosen, despite what today its puppet government wants to show to the outside world. Ukraine has chosen, and Europe has chosen. Yet living next to a dangerous neighbor carries a high cost, but the cost of complacency is far higher. So this is not time for hesitation. It's a time for resolve, for unity, and for action. The warning signs are too many around us. Georgia was the first, but it should not be the last. Thank you. Thank you.
So, thanks to our two speakers for setting the stage for what is ahead, the upcoming panel, and I would like to invite the moderator of the panel, Madame Vesna Pusic, to take the chair and to invite all the other panelists.
Hello, thanks for being here and being excited, I expect, as much as I am, about our fantastic panel on which we have the Czech President Petr Pavel. Mr. President. We have the Georgian President Salome Zourabichvili. Madam President. We have the Stanford professor Larry Diamond. Stanford is not a country, but sometimes is better known than countries, so United States. And Japanese representative Taro Kono. As they say, this panel doesn't need an introduction, but I will just make a small introduction of the panelists. So, President Petr Pavel, President of Czechia since 2023, retired general with a lot of field experience, former chairman of the NATO Military Committee, former chief of general staff of the Czech Armed Forces, and the first Western head of state to visit Donbass since the all-out aggression on Ukraine. President Salome Zourabichvili, President of Georgia since 2018, the first woman president of Georgia. And I think not, but sometimes they say for the time being the last Georgian president elected in direct elections. I'm sure it's not going to be the last. I'm sure it's going to come back. But in 2024, constitutional amendments were introduced in Georgia where somebody was elected to be president indirectly, so without the consent of the Georgian people. Professor Larry Diamond, professor at Stanford University, professor of political sociology, democratic theory, founding co-editor of Journal of Democracy, senior fellow at Hoover Institution, and for those with a social science bent, with Juan Linz and Seymour Martin Lipset, the person who did the 26-country study in democracy called Democracy in Developing Countries, and published a series of books based on this study between 1988 and 1995. And Representative Taro Kono, who is hiding behind this representative title, but actually 4 or 5 times minister in Japanese government, former Minister of Digital Transformation, former Minister of Public Administration, which is called sort of much more ambitiously in Japan, former Minister of Defense, and former Minister of Foreign Affairs under Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. This is a panel, as the title says, on the living next or having a dangerous neighbor, but also having a major disruptive force in the world in the form of Russia and its president, Vladimir Putin. We all thought that somehow, and very often it's quoted, that Russian economy is not bigger than Spain's, let's say, and so that it's not able to play such an important disruptive role. However, we've seen in the past decade or so, maybe a little longer, that Russia has been extremely successful as a disruptive actor. So my first question goes to President Pavel. What is it, Mr. President? How come? Is it that the cyber warfare, information warfare, drone warfare has taken precedence and taken over from the classical war? And that's what gave Russia this global reach, this capacity to become so influential again in disrupting not only its neighbors, but I would say the faraway countries, something that President Zourabichvili mentioned. And what do you think will the new Czech government do about it, and how would it react to this conditions or these circumstances created by Russia, not only in Eastern Europe, but primarily or as a first step in Eastern Europe, Mr. President?
It's not an easy question. In fact, it's so broad that I could spend an hour talking about different elements of it. Okay, let me try it in a brief format. First, I think Russia has learned a lesson from the Cold War. They learned that they cannot win the confrontation with the West, with democracies, by traditional means. That means by creating more and more weapons and more powerful armies. They learned that their economy will never be stronger than Western democracies. But they also learned from history, from Mr. Sun Tzu. If you cannot be as strong as your enemy, try to make him weaker. This is what they focused since then. That is to sow uncertainty into democratic societies, to sow distrust to institutions, to the politicians, to infiltrate the idea that democracy, especially in its liberal form, is actually a failing system, and that the only future is with they don't call it autocracy, but they use different adjectives to democracy. They use the words like sovereign democracy. But what does it actually mean is that by in fact, pushing into our societies frustration, distrust, uncertainty. They can manipulate the population. They can easily focus on some problems that citizens in democratic societies objectively see. They inflate them, and they try to use these internal problems that every society has as a fundamental source of fractions within the system. And that is why they are so successful in their propaganda, cyber and information warfare, because they work with fears and with emotions, not with facts. And we haven't found so far sufficiently efficient response how to face such a level of propaganda, infiltration of our open systems, because being open by principle, we're objectively weaker in our defense than autocratic regimes. So that's one weakness. And the other is that democracies were not able to find early enough strong answer to aggressions in 2008 in Georgia, and later on in 2014 against Ukraine, started by annexation of Crimea and later with an open aggression. And our insufficient response, our lack of determination, created a perception in Russia, and they can somehow manipulate in this space, divide us, and eventually preserve their own interests. This is what they are doing for years. And I believe that if we want to make democracies strong enough, we will have to find again common language, how to respond to those who only respect the power, not by creating more tensions and leading the situation towards the confrontation, but being strong and determined enough to set the lines that will not be crossed, being it incursions into our own airspace, being it violations of rules at open sea, but also, for example, interference into our democratic processes. That these lines have to be clearly respected, and if not, we have to push them, because autocratic regimes only respect such a self-confident language of democracies.
And the Czech government?
With respect to Czech government, we are now in the process of forming the government. So I can only talk about probable prime minister, probable government. But it seems that the winning party of Andrej Babiš, is not pro-Russian. But there is a risk that they will have to form coalition with parties that are, let's say, softer in their approach to Russia or China. And I believe that we have to initiate the interest of civil society that by far big majority wants to preserve our pro-Western orientation, our membership in NATO and in the EU as the foundation of our democracy and stability and security.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Madam President, many questions, but you also mentioned your negotiations with Russia while you were foreign minister of Georgia, with the same person that still is the foreign minister of Russia, the never-changing Sergei Lavrov. How did you do it? I mean, you were successful. Was it because the times were different? Did you use a special approach? How come you were successful?
I don't know, because maybe I was the first Georgian official that didn't speak Russian with him. So it was destabilizing. But more seriously, I think times were different. It was not a strong Russia at that time. Maybe Russia was just testing, again, Georgia testing ground, testing a different type of relation, but it didn't last for long. First of all, in this agreement that was about the withdrawal of the military bases, they did not include the one military base that was in occupied Abkhazia. And then shortly after that, we had the 2008, that was in 2005. And yes, indeed, they respected their part of the agreement at that time, which everybody was very surprised because it was the very first time in our secular relation. But it was followed very shortly by the 2008 war, which transferred de facto those military bases that were on this side of the delimitation line on the other side and multiplied them, because by now we have at least 4 military bases and one that they want a naval military base that they are projecting to construct on the shore of the Black Sea.
May I just a follow-up question that's related also what President Pavel was saying, and this is this combination of pressure from outside, from Russia, but also the role from, of the enemy within, so to speak. The people that they manage to recruit within the country to work against the country and its interests.
That's a very interesting, which of course we do not have all the elements to really have the answers, but very clearly, that's what I was saying, that in Georgia, this government and this party, that Georgian dream, which has become the Georgian nightmare, was at the beginning. First of all, it's a completely different party. Those people that were in 2012, 80% are no longer there, nor the parties that were part of the first coalition. So it's a different one. But the essential, of course, people and the first person, Mr. Ivanishvili, was there, is there, and is the only one that takes today any decisions. It's very clear that all the people around are just puppets in his hands. And he clearly is applying Russian methods, Russian handbook, Russian instructions. Why? What was the compromise or what happened? That probably, after some time, the history will tell us. What we're watching now are the facts, not the explanation of the facts. But the fact is that we have a proxy government, a proxy leader that is really applying to Russia, to Georgia, what was applied in Russia to the civil society to crush it, with one big difference. Georgian civil society is not the Russian civil society. We've had a civil society even under Soviet times. We had people that were at that time thinking freely and expressing their views. We still have a vibrant civil society. We have young people, and almost all of them under 30 have been visited or studied in Europe or in the United States. It's a different generation that they won't crush that easily. That is our hope.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the Americans. Professor Diamond. Yeah, you're not the politician, so you have, let's say, more detached, maybe view of how things are happening and what's happening with Russian President Putin, who we will all, especially the older generation, remember was met by very positive reactions from the American President Clinton at that time, from the British Prime Minister Blair at that time, who all thought that he was going to at least continue on this road of opening up Russia, creating economic and then maybe gradually even stronger political ties with the West. President Clinton even initiated within NATO the so-called NATO-Russia Council that met at every NATO ministerial meeting until 2014. So I was sitting with Sergei Lavrov on this NATO meetings because everybody was expecting that this cooperation will work. Has Putin changed? Or was he deceiving the world at that time? And maybe as a follow-up question to that, again, he has a very good relationship, it seems, with the American president. So how does this tie into the changes that Putin has introduced not only in his approach to the world and international relations, but also his aggressive and disruptive behavior globally?
So, first of all, I want to thank these two remarkable presidents. I have been at a lot of conferences and international meetings. I have never had the privilege of hearing back-to-back such eloquent and memorable statements that I think must receive very wide distribution. I'll circle back to that in a moment. I'm not a Russia specialist, as you know, Vesna, but I think I can say the following with some confidence. And our colleagues who've had more direct interaction may elaborate or disagree. I think the answer to your question is both. Number one, this is a career intelligence officer from the KGB. He's a master at both manipulation and deception. I think there's absolutely no question that he had an agenda. Anyone who would say the worst thing that happened in the 20th century was the dissolution of the Soviet Union has already pretty much indicated, who he is and what his agenda is. I also think it's the case, if you read about him over time, that he has become a more deformed and dangerous person psychologically, that he has become more paranoid. I think this is definitely true with Xi Jinping as well. And when you have that kind of absolute power and you're surrounded by so many praise singers and unlimited wealth, and you're fed all of these mistruths that you come to believe, it has a distorting psychological impact that I think can only be properly understood, if you resort either to psychology or to literature, and probably to Shakespeare indispensably. So both things are true. I want to say that I think, in a way, fortunately, that the relationship between Trump and Putin today is much worse than I feared it would be. Many of us feared from the previous two elections and maybe the first term, and then that summit between Putin and Trump, which in my view should never have happened because Putin is such a master at person-to-person manipulation. But once Trump came back to Washington, the power realities have settled in. And I don't think there's a great relationship right now between Russia and the United States. And I personally think it's going to deteriorate just for practical, strategic reasons. We don't have a lot of time, so I'd like to say one other thing. There's been much discussion properly, and thank you both for highlighting it, of Russia's dangerous mastery of soft power. And we're not helpless here. We have a lot of expertise too. We haven't sufficiently mobilized it. We haven't sufficiently invested in it. And in the United States, we've been divesting in it ever since, in one of the most tragic institutional developments of my lifetime in terms of American engagement with the world, we unilaterally shut down the U.S. Information Agency. And then, we struggled for decades to create a unit within the State Department, the Office of Public Diplomacy. I think we've had an average of one undersecretary for public diplomacy every 16 months. It's been utterly unsuccessful. So we have to get serious again. I'll pose a challenge back to Jakub there, and maybe he can do something with it. I think you've had two historic and globally extremely important statements here in the last 40 minutes from two extraordinary leaders that the world ought to know about, that young people ought to know about, and not just in Europe. So they're not going to know about it by you putting out a press release or putting it on your website. You figure out a way to get it on TikTok in 15-second bites and elsewhere in the social media worlds where people will absorb it. And there's plenty of emotion in what we just heard and idealism to push back.
Thank you. Let's get on TikTok, guys. Minister Connor, we always, or most of the time, approach Russia from Europe, let's say, and the dangers, and see Europe as the first line of defense. But of course, Russia is also on the other side of the world, right next to you. So how do you see cooperation, or not even cooperation, just peaceful coexistence with Russia? Is it possible? And have you noticed in Japan new developments, let's say, in Russia's approach to Japan?
Thank you. The war between former Soviet Union and Japan technically ended with joint declaration, but we still haven't got a peace treaty between Russia and Japan. So Prime Minister Abe tried to bring in many economic projects into Russia. We were even very soft on Russia after Crimea. So finally, 2018, Putin agreed with Prime Minister Abe to speed up the peace treaty negotiation. I was a chief negotiator. My counterpart was Lavrov. But we had several talks, but they had no intention of going into substance. I believe Abe-san was a bit naive. I think Putin tricked him into believing Putin was seriously trying to create a better relationship between Russia and Japan. But now I have to doubt it. Having said that, Russia today is, I believe, is a symptom. The root cause is China. As you said, Russian economy is very small compared to China. Even without support coming from China, Russia cannot continue war against Ukraine. So how are we going to deal with China will determine our relationship with Russia. Right now, China gives a lot of support to Russia. North Korea sends soldiers, ammunition, missiles. So there's a unified theater between Europe and East Asia. And we need to work together on this war. And I think not during the Putin era, but after Putin, we are hoping if we could flip Russia on our side so we can isolate China. And how are we going to do that? I think soft power, information warfare, we got to directly work on Russian people to choose between the West or China. And we need to get their support for the West, get their support for democratic value. As Larry said, maybe TikTok is a way to do it. Maybe there are a lot of other ways to do it. I think that's something we need to do. We also need to get support from the global South. The economic sanction against Russia is not working properly because a lot of global South still dealing with Russia. And I think we need to win their support for our strategy. And a lot of people in the global South thinks the West has double standard. We criticize China, we criticize Russia, but United States with democratically elected president and congressman and senator are quite disruptive, even harmful for international order today. So we need to get our act together to win the support from the Global South. And then we can convince the Russian people or the people in the Global South that it would be better to work with us than work with China.
Thank you so much for this. I have a series of questions for the second round. We won't be able to do it all, but they gave us another 10 minutes. And you made this great introduction into one question I really, really wanted to ask. It has to do with Global South. This year, 3 Chilean authors published a book called The New Non-Alignment, arguing that the Global South needs non-aligned policies, a little different from the old non-alignment in the 50s and 60s, but still this time, of course, between China and the West. Global South, or the global majority, as they like to call themselves, which they are in many ways, being disappointed over and over again with the way both the United States and Europe has treated this big part of the world, including, for instance, during the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, when both we in Europe and the United States sort of closed ranks, weren't sending vaccines and everything that was needed to the Global South, or let's say Latin America or Africa, parts of Asia. And their argument is, shared values fine, but crunch time is the real test. And they have a lot of crunch time. And let me start with us in Europe. We weren't very smart about it in establishing relations with the Global South. In many ways, Africa, I would say, is an equivalent for Europe that Latin America is for the States. They made a lot of mistakes. We shouldn't make those mistakes. Mr. President, should they go non-aligned, or can we do something about it to sort of make the global majority, let's say, or the Global South, the allies of democracy? Because it's really interesting to see how many countries of the Global South didn't introduce sanctions to Russia after the attack on Ukraine.
Well, I believe we should probably start with defining what non-aligned means. Is it non-aligned with, on one hand, democracies with the US in lead, on the other, let's say, more or less autocratic countries led by China? I would say none of these countries of Global South feels non-aligned with the rules that have been established after the Second World War. And Czech Republic is not even a regional power, so we are not trying to push the idea that we should lead in any way an effort to improve the relationship with Global South. But in all my contacts with the leaders of countries of Global South, I always stress that regardless of their attitude towards China or Russia, what matters to them is that they are protected by the rules. Because if we ignore the rules, if we allow only powerful countries to set the rules, then we all lost. And that's why I would urge them to be aligned with the world that is governed by rules, and not by those who have the exclusive power.
For that, we'd have to stick to the rules ourselves also. Madam President, to some extent, also if you could address this relationship with the so-called global South, because sometimes a lot of us who are part, supposedly, of the West also feel a little bit like on the margins of this global South. But also another question that maybe I first want to ask President Pavel, but I will ask you now about the coalition of the willing as a global coalition that coexists and was started around Ukraine, but it might, in the future, depending on what happens, especially in the United States, it might actually represent a new defense coalition that will maybe even parallel, if not substitute NATO.
Well, substitute NATO, I don't know if that's either feasible or wishable.
It's not desirable.
But it's clear that there is a need, and the EU is showing that there is a need for more flexibility in the formats, for less dependence on very strict internal rules that really prevent and paralyze, in a way, the capacity of the European Union to act, which we are witnessing ourselves these days when the European Union is unable to take decisions without the full consensus, and that consensus can depend on one country, which is not very democratic per se. So sometimes democracy runs against democracy, and that's something that should be reviewed. Double standards is one of the problems that, of course, should be addressed and very front-like, because that is something that hinders the European and Western, in general, soft policy towards the rest of the world. Because if it was successful because the Western countries believed and implemented their values. If they stop doing that, or they don't do it really in a very direct fashion, then it becomes less convincing for others. And another thing that I would like to say on Global South, there is a Global South that is a little bit forgotten, that wants to be non-aligned, both to China and Russia, and that is Central Asia. And there I come back to the Caucasus, and it's very important because the link is there. It was being activated, and suddenly they feel that they don't know whether their link with Europe and with the West is viable anymore. And it's a region that has no colonial past with any of the European or Western powers. So it's very open to these new developments, and very rich for some of the things that President Trump likes. Mm-hmm. So there too, there should be more attention. So there is a vast diversity in what is called Global South, and there is certainly possibilities for the future of the European Union policies and the Western world's policies for the next round of the 21st century. And old policies, like the policies of the KGB man, are not necessarily those that are working the best.
Thank you very much. Professor Diamond, you did, among other places, study on democracies in Latin America. And how do you see this skepticism of the Latin American countries towards the, let's say, global North or global West, whatever we want to call ourselves, and their relatively close cooperation with China, especially in economic terms?
So I think it's important that we not reify any kind of regional concept. There's a lot of diversity in the Global South, and it's not only regional in the way you're implying now. And even within Latin America, you know, there's tremendous diversity. Some of it is political between governments of the left and governments of the right. But some of it, some countries have natural resources, some don't. Some have long histories of democracy. Some are still trying to stabilize it. I think that there is a long history of resentment against Yankee imperialism. We know exactly what that term means. There is a questionable history here in terms of how the U.S. Has intervened and thrown its weight around. I think it's well known that the U.S. Was involved in some way in the coup that toppled democracy in Chile in September of 1973, even though the country was disintegrating politically on its own as well, and Salvador Allende did nothing very responsible to arrest the polarization. So, I think there's a new moment, and we have I don't know if he's here in the room now, but we have the distinguished recent former Secretary General of the OAS, I think here at this conference, Mr. Almagro. He could probably better answer this. I'm just coming recently from a conference of electoral management bodies that meets annually and this year in Santiago. And I think there is a tremendous autonomous infrastructure of, in quiet institutional ways of democratic cooperation, democratic learning, democratic engagement, and democratic resolve. And that we should be investing in that as well as in civil society in Latin America. The one other thing I'd like to say is what I'd say to, and have said to my friends in Africa and elsewhere in the world. I think we could say this in Central Asia, we could say it in other parts of Asia, is we don't need you to join an alliance with the West, with us. We just need you to defend your sovereignty. And if you resolve to defend your sovereignty, there's no way you're going to sign an agreement with Huawei to build your telecom system and capture all your data. There's no way you're going to sign an agreement to surrender one of your ports or your infrastructures in exchange for, the relatively unfavorable terms of a commercial interest rate loan from the People's Republic of China. So if we help civil societies and governments in the global South to just defend their sovereignty, we in the West will come out fine.
Thank you. And final, an easy one for Minister Kono. Russia is a fact of life. It might change when the government changes. It might go in different directions. God knows whether we will be around to see that, but it might. But it's a fact of life now. What should we do about establishing some kind of relations with Russia? How should we go about it? I mean, it seems that you are a little bit more optimistic than the rest of us looking from the European side. How should we deal with Russia now?
Well, thank you. It's a very difficult question. I think looking from the East and looking from the West, the Russia looks different. We have China in front of Russia, so we think about Russia as sort of a younger kid brother of China. It used to be Russia, maybe Soviet Union, maybe a big brother, but it's no longer. So it's how to deal with China. And we would like to engage with Russia if possible, not during the war with Ukraine, probably not with Putin. So what can we do is, I think we need to keep on sanction. We need to put the pressure on Russia so that they would have to come forward to negotiate some way to end Ukraine. I don't know, realistically speaking, can we push Russia back to the original border? I'm not sure. But I think we need to keep putting pressure on Russia so that end the war. That is the first priority. And then we can work on Russian general public so that they could, I don't know if they can rise against Putin, probably not, but we need to put the seed in their mind. what could happen after Putin disappears. Maybe there's a new Russia coming up. So end the war with acceptable term with Ukraine, and then work on Russian general public. I think that's what we can do. At the same time, we need to coordinate the strategy vis-a-vis China. I think US, Europe, Japan, other like-minded countries need to convince global South so that we can have a unified strategy in terms of security, in terms of politics, in terms of economy like China's excess capacity. So that's what we need to do.
Thank you very much. This is the end of our panel. Food for thought. Many ideas that came out, but make your enemy weaker if you can't win, I think, is one important message. Also, the idea that democracies need to speak with a common language. In other words, more unity on the side of democracies. Unified Europe and East Asia. China as an important factor in thinking about Russia. End the war and work with Russian society. Let's see about that. Thank you very much.